Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. How can we bridge the gap between autistic communities and traditional therapies? If you've ever wondered, you'll want to listen to part 2 of my conversation with Autistic BCBA Mari Cerda, which was originally released on April 22, 2021. Mari provides professional development training for teachers and schools on various neurodiversity-affirming topics. She's the co-founder of the LEAP Institute, a U.S.-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to increase equitable access for marginalized groups entering the field of ABA, or applied behavior analysis. Among other things, we discuss Mari's collectivist approach to providing services, ethical considerations, and addressing the harm historically caused by ABA practices, the importance of approaching services from a neurodiversity-affirming perspective, strategies for inclusive community-based support, and ideas to bridge the gap between the autistic community and ABA. In this episode, discover what's possible when values inform the method. And now I present you Mari Cerda. You actually have a really unique position as an autistic BCBA because you can personally relate to the clients that you serve. Did your approach change after you discovered your own diagnosis?
I don't think my approach changed. I think I became braver in speaking out about my approach because for a while, and I've told a few friends about this, people would see my work and they would say things like, wow, that's like dirty ABA. Like you're not withdrawing reinforcement. You're not ignoring. You're not doing all of these things. And I'm like, I wouldn't want it done to me. So my practice, I think from the beginning was seen by some as very atypical. And again, I'm pulling my own cultural background of being deeply rooted in collectivism and communal support and recognizing that when we talk about manipulating environments, I'm not touching the client, I'm not touching the child. I am manipulating the environment they live in and making sure that the environment supports them, understands them, and finds ways to effectively communicate so that they can have their needs met. And for me, that was how I learned the science and how I learned to apply it. Yes, it's a westernized model. Yes, it was made by white men, intended for white male children. But everything that I learned was immediately absorbed and infused by a neurodiverse, autistic, indigenous mind. And so there were things that I immediately recognized, like that's not going to work for my people. But I see the principle of it, and I see where in my community and my people, how it should look and how it should manifest.
Could you give an example of how you might run a program from this collectivist mindset and how that would be different from an individualist mindset?
Oh gosh, it involves bringing the community in. So if a child were to have a typical, let's say, social play goal where we want them to be able to appropriately request a toy from a neurotypical peer, I'm going to switch that to also include teaching the neurotypical peer to recognize that that individual is asking for something, to recognize that that child has the right to see what it is that you're doing just as much as you do, and addressing it from this child may be different to you, but they have every single right that you have being in this space on the playground, being able to play on the swings, being able to, use the shovel to play with the sand, and really bringing in the peers or the individuals that this person is going to be living with in a community type setting and existing with, and not putting all the pressure on the client or the child that is receiving the supports. Because I think sometimes our therapy, I don't even like to call it therapy, our supports and coaching is so focused on the client has to fix everything. They have to fix everything about themselves and get this right so that they can make the lives of the people around them easier. And that's not what it's about. I need the people around them to put in just as much work as what I'm expecting this child or this client to put in. And then a lot of my goals are also related to what the child values. It's not my job to determine what they value. It's my job to help them to learn to recognize that you can do and say things that get you closer to what you value, or you can do and say things that take you away from it. But when everything is related to what an individual values, it helps cut the fine line between coaching someone to tolerate difficult things and difficult tasks because it's related to what they value versus almost forcing a traumatic experience to learn a skill that's not valuable to them and never will be. For example, I will never probably value conversations that are small talk, that don't have a point. I probably won't ever value that. But if someone were to sit there and try to force me, I would be miserable. It would be traumatic for me because it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It takes many spoons. It takes a lot of energy to have to do that. And it's funny because I value teaching. That is something I'm so passionate about. And so my job requires me to speak in front of 50, 70, 100 people, which is a lot of energy for me. And it takes me time to decompress from that and to re-regulate. And, I will self-seclude in order to kind of get my bearings back. But I love to do that. That's what I value. And so the stress of that is worth being able to teach someone and to see that light bulb and for it to change their trajectory and the way that they treat people like me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I approach probably a majority of the work that I do. And then there is a different set of practices for individuals that have much higher support needs. There are some things that are a little more targeted. If you have a child that is demonstrating fecal smearing, there's a sensory need. Much like autism is a spectrum, our field should be a spectrum in the approaches that are taken. But at all levels, autonomy within a collectivist mindset, if that can make any kind of sense, and student, client, child, whoever, assent and consent, and values-driven practices should be the foundation for all of ABA, regardless of whatever vein or approach we go down, depending on the needs of the person. There should never be a time when I'm providing a service that the individual does not want.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk later about how we can improve the field, but we have a few listener questions that I want to get to before we move on. So these are contributed by Priscilla Haros.
Oh, yes.
Do you know her?
I kind of do. Yes, on Instagram.
Nice, nice. It's funny how it just, brings everyone together now. And it's a really great way to connect.
And especially for people that are autistic, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
have probably found some of my closest friends on that platform
Mm-hmm.
because it's so much easier for me.
Yeah. So she wants to know, how do your clients react when they learn you're autistic? So I guess first, do you disclose? And maybe this can also extend to parents if you tell them.
So I haven't got to that point.
Okay.
And I think there's various reasons for it. Many of the parents that I work with are still in the grieving process, and I see so many people really being harsh on parents and not recognizing that you can grieve something and still love something at the same time, and many of these parents are grieving a future for their child that they expected and anticipated. And there's the fear of the unknown of so then what is their future? And I think being a parent, there's times when we kind of all grieve what maybe we thought our children would be, but they're their own unique individual. And so I feel like most times parents aren't ready to hear that I am autistic because my life trajectory is not the only measure that they should use for expectation of their child, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I worry that they'll think, okay, you're autistic and you've done all these things, so that my child's going to be the exact same way and they'll be able to do these things. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. I can't predict the future. And so I am just now kind of coming into my own in self disclosing to colleagues and to the field. And thankfully, there are a few others in the field that are both autistic and behavior analysts. And, I think we are walking precariously down a middle road of speaking truth and recognizing that by doing that, we're not going to be embraced by either side most of the time. And so I'm navigating just, disclosing that in the professional realm.
Hmm.
And I feel like sometimes with the older children, it's funny, you recognize other neurodiverse people. It's like a radar. And so I think sometimes, when I'm hanging out and we're playing and we're talking and we're, working on some skills, like I'll kind of see that like, huh, you're thinking a little bit like me, and I don't know if they maybe like really consciously register that. And some children don't even know that they are autistic. I don't know that parents have had that conversation with them. And so I have to navigate that carefully. I'm not there yet. It would be wonderful if one day we could be,
Hmm.
right? Where children openly know, I'm autistic, I'm neurodiverse, and this person coming to visit me is like a coach. They talk to me about the stuff that I'm dealing with. They give me ideas of what I can do, and they help me to recognize that some things I don't have to worry about because it's not what I value anyways. And that's kind of the beautiful world that I hope we get to one day.
Yeah, me too. And I understand your apprehension about not wanting to give false hope or false expectations for families. But I do also see such a tremendous value in building a stronger rapport. Like
Mhm.
families thinking, wow, okay, this person gets it. Like I can trust them to make good decisions because they know what my child is going through.
Yeah, no, and I can definitely see that. There's just so many layers to that onion. Even walking into some of the homes and being minority, being indigenous and Latina and having darker skin and darker hair, there's already apprehension. And so again, that's kind of that tightrope that I'm walking is there's so many layers of who I am. And when I see that the outer layers that you can see that are visible are already met with hesitation, I'm very careful about whatever else I present, whatever other layer that I choose to reveal. So again, in a perfect world, we could be open books.
Right.
So maybe one day.
Yeah. So Priscilla's next question, you've kind of talked about your approach. She wants to know what your favorite ABA strategies and goals are.
Oh gosh. Favorite ABA strategy? Functional communication. To me, that's the only real strategy that's worth addressing is making sure that the client has a voice, whatever that voice looks like. Because once they have a voice, then they can tell me what they need, what they want, and they can tell me when to back the heck away. And so really just, if there's like I don't know that there's like a specific structured protocol. I always tell my supervisees, like the only thing that should be rigid and structured is really your data collection. Everything else should be fluid. Everything else should be so organic and natural. And as a matter of fact, I was messaging some colleagues that were asking, like, what would you tell your RBTs to stop doing and to do? And I would tell them that everything should be play. Everything should be natural interactions with you just offering opportunities to embed a skill to practice and honoring when the client's like, not feeling it, don't want to practice it right now. Again, that's my dirty ABA is it's very much about helping this individual learn to communicate and me learning to understand how they're already communicating. In the indigenous culture and some indigenous people's, I guess, way of thinking, there are people that speak to other people. And then there are people that speak to the plants. There are people that speak to the animals. There are people that speak to the sky. Again, that's just really tapping into the way the indigenous culture views the way people communicate. And so for me, that's just such a natural part of seeing an individual in the way they communicate and not being so rigid in if you don't say please and thank you and you don't speak in these recognized formats, then you're not communicating. And so I think that's where a lot of the pieces of who I am culturally and who I am just from my own, ancestors is that communication is everything. And if we focus on that, then everything else is easy.
Mm-hmm. And tying back to what you were saying earlier about including the community in that, I really love that example that you gave about teaching the other kids in the sandbox that your client deserves to be heard also, like has a voice. And how can we teach the people around to look out for those things? It's just pushing for more acceptance in the world and more inclusion, teaching these younger kids, like, hey, this person is trying to communicate with you. And that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because we're such a society, at least what I'm seeing, that's so self-absorbed. Like it's all about me. It's all about me. And we never stop and looking at this person that's maybe giving us cues and going, oh, wait a second, let me try to understand what you're saying. Let me try to see, and just as this is, that's the individualist that I see. Like it's me, me, me. And even just in raising my own children, it was always when we went to the playground, I would pull them aside and say, do you see that little friend right there? Tell me what you see them doing. And they would say something to me. They would respond, oh, I see them doing this, this, and this. What do you think they're trying to say? What do you think that they need? And so from the very beginning, my children have been taught that you are very aware of how other people are trying to navigate the world around them and around you. And you need to be able to say, you know what? Let me learn how you're trying to speak to me. Let me step into your world for a moment. Instead of this, really harsh, come on, we're going to pull them out. We're going to pull them out of out of this autistic inner world that they're living in and make them participate going to the restaurant and make them do these things because it makes me as a parent feel better, because it makes me as a society member feel better and more comfortable. And so it's more work, but it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And then to teach the child with the disability or with the autism, hey, they're listening. They're listening. So now let's start the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you to Priscilla for sending those excellent questions. And if anyone else would like to contribute to our episodes, you can follow our Instagram at Autism Podcast to stay up to date on upcoming guests. So, Mari, I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier with regards to trauma that people have received. On this podcast, we've talked previously about the division actually between some autistic adults and the field of applied behavior analysis. And, as a behavior analyst myself, and on behalf of the Global Autism Project, I can say that we definitely acknowledge that harm has been and can be caused by ABA. So I just want to give our audience a little bit of background because, we have a very wide range of listeners. We have parents and service providers, also self-advocates, and some people may not really be familiar with what we're talking about here. So could you give just a few examples of what specific practices are known to have caused harm?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anything that's extinction based, where you are, in some way ignoring the individual and ignoring their humanity in moments where they probably need support the most. I think we have also made a grave mistake, even though the grandfathers of our science, Bear, Torino, Skinner, all said private events are as equally important in addressing. Emotions are private events, thoughts are private events. The problem is they're more tricky. It's a lot higher response effort on our part to address those as part of an individual's behavior. But someone is much more than the external behaviors that we see them exhibiting. And I've shared this before, that some of the most significant and dangerous self-injurious behaviors are someone's private events, the thoughts that they have about themselves, the emotions that they have, the self-esteem issues that arise from not being understood, not being accepted as is. And so I think that as a field, we have neglected one of the most critical environments of the people we serve, and that is the internal environment, private events and thoughts. And by doing that, by recognizing that we have neglected that, we also need to recognize that there are other disciplines that we must collaborate with in order to address that area. We are not the end all be all. I am not a fan of the phrase that ABA will save the world, because it won't. And we need to recognize that we are one tool in a toolbox, and that parents, caregivers, therapists, everyone needs to recognize that we are just one spoke in a massive wheel of supports that an individual should be receiving. There has been incredible damage done at the hands of individuals who have not stopped and recognized that the practices may work, but at what cost? To what detriment to the individual's internal environment, to their thoughts, to their emotions. And, there is some on the side of anti-ABA that want to get rid of all of it, that want to say that we cannot do this anymore. And, my concern with that is anything that is developed, any science, any practice, any medical model can be used for nefarious purposes in the hands of the wrong people. It's not necessarily the science, it's the people using it. And many in the community go back and talk about Lovas. And much of that was related to the work that Lovas did, because prior to that, it was more about learning how humans learned and how humans behaved. It was more about being an observer in this and learning how all of this worked. And then it was kind of like, oh, well, we have the key to changing behavior. Let's now apply it. And there was no pause for, we can, but should we? And so it just jumped on this trajectory and just sped up to where we're at now, at this point in time. And we are now, I think, getting to a pivotal moment where many in the field are saying, we've got to change course immediately. And as an autist, one of the things that I hope that comes from my community is a recognition that change requires compromise on both sides. And we may not be able to fully either change the name or get rid of the science, but we sure can hold people accountable. We sure can look at our ethical codes and recognize that just because it says the client consents, that doesn't necessarily mean the individual. It can mean the parent, it can mean the corporation. We have to recognize that the words that we use in our ethical codes, the words that we use in our assessments, those are all performative. They're going to drive the way that we perceive the people we're serving. And so I think that, again, and I talk to my husband about this all the time, I'm walking a very narrow middle road, and I just want to speak truth. And unfortunately, when you speak truth, many times the truth was going to upset one side or the other, because ABA has done damage, but ABA has also done good. And there has to be space for both of those sides to have the conversation.
Hey, Rachel here. Do you know anyone else who might benefit from listening to this episode? Maybe an autistic person wanting to grow their community, a parent wanting to support their loved one, or a professional wanting to develop their skills. I encourage you to share this episode if you'd like to help them out. And now, back to the conversation. What are some of your ideas to bridge that gap?
We need autistic researchers. We need coursework to be neurodiversity affirming. We need to have a history of ABA. In fact, that's actually something that I'm getting ready to have a work group on, is the history of applied behavior analysis. Like, the dark side, the good side, everything. Many people aren't even aware of, you know, going as far back as Watson in the 1913, Cantor in the 1917 and 1918 era. It goes back so much further. And I think people really need to know where we've come from, the good and the bad. It's kind of like I tell my children with Texas history, like, you're only getting one side of the story. Let's dig a little deeper into the history of, the US, Texas. And it's the same thing. We've got to have a much better understanding of the history of our field, both the good and the bad. If we're going to make change, we need to have a way to reference where it went wrong, even more deeply than just saying it's Lovas, we're Lovas ABA, or Lovas trained. We've got to go a little deeper than that and see where the breakdown happened. And then we need to be hiring autistic consultants. We need to have community consultants who are neurodiverse that can go into a clinic and say, these practices are not neurodiversity affirming. This is where you need to work on. We need to be able to now move from the platform of speaking and shouting to the work. What are we going to do that's productive? And I have shared before in the past that we need to disrupt a system as gently as possible, because I want the system to come tumbling down, but I don't want people hurt. I don't want the individuals within the system to be harmed, because then I'm no better than the system that I'm trying to disrupt, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I also kind of get the sense that there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement for the harm that has been caused. Like, should this maybe fall on the BACB to make an announcement and say, yes, there has been harm and let's do better? Like, would that make the autistic community feel better, do you think?
No, because I think it would be a performative move. And I think perhaps the reason why many of these larger organizations haven't spoken out, because when you make a statement like that, then action has to follow. And if they're not prepared for the action piece, then all they are doing is giving a lip service. If they're truly about the work, then what we will start to see is boards bringing in autistic voices, boards having autistic individuals be a part of writing the ethical code, universities bringing in autistic voices to actually write some of the coursework and curriculum. We have to make sure that what we are doing is not bringing in a face for token performative measures or for lip service. And that's something that I shared with Dr. Megan Miller in an Uncomfortable Conversations episode, was like, if you're really not ready to hear what we have to say, don't bring us on board. But then I want to kind of further say to my autistic community, if you are not prepared to speak and offer productive resolution that is able to think logically through this reform, even though we do have an impassioned desire for this to change, we have to go about it logically. And I'm impatient. I want it to change immediately. But we have to recognize where we have to take the small steps to build that momentum, to get the snowball rolling. And if we refuse to do that, if we refuse to sit in those uncomfortable spaces, knowing that that's the direction we're going, we're just going to stay right where we're at. We're going to become stagnant. And my husband said, it's like autophagy, where you just consume yourself, because all we're doing is just continuing to yell into the void that this is wrong. What you have done is wrong to my people. Okay, great. We're bringing you in. Help us make the change. Help us. And it's going to be difficult, because what that means is to collaborate. And when you collaborate, what you're ultimately recognizing and acknowledging is we don't always agree or see eye to eye, but what we value is a better system.
Have you met autistic people who were against ABA and then changed their mind? Being autistic, one of the characteristics is being very set on something and having strong opinions. Like, is there reasonable room to actually have someone go from one extreme and move towards the middle?
So let me dive a little bit into that. What I am finding is this movement is built upon the focus and the values of removing and fighting something that someone hates. That in and of itself is problematic because of the direction it takes the movement and the people within the movement. What I am finding is that individuals who are autistic will reach out privately and say, this is my community. I've never been accepted anywhere else but here. And I find myself being swept up in this movement, even though I don't agree with it 100%. But I'm afraid. I'm afraid to say that I don't agree 100% because the movement is rooted in almost this ostracizing of anyone that disagrees. And if you are not fully aligned with every single part of it, there's no room for those tough conversations. There's no room for diversity of thought within this movement. And what's going to have to happen is that some of these major influencers in this movement, if it's truly about improving services for this community, if that's truly what the value is, we're going to have the difficult coming to terms of that may mean working with the people that are part of the system that we're so much against. And it's and Joy Johnson does an amazing job. If anyone ever can listen to her speak about it, there is also a part of this movement that is concerning for us autistic individuals where it's becoming about more of a platform for something completely different. And we see a lot of similarities in some of these like TikTok videos and some of these things that are being said. And my concern is that it's taking away from the work that really needs to happen. It's like there's this attempt to just keep us in this space of calling out and canceling with no real desire to sit at the table together and hash it out. Basically, like, this is where we need to work. These are the steps we need to take. This is how we as autists need to be involved in this process. This is where you as behavior analysts and professionals need to step back, and having that uncomfortable conversation. And it's going to take some of these larger influencers kind of driving this movement to really stop and ask, like, what we can't just wave the wand and this all disappears. There are other logistics like billions of dollars in funding. There are other things that need to happen strategically to disrupt this system, and we need help doing it. We need to be able to shift from coming together to fight against what we hate to shift to we all have the common value of we want to build something that for the people we love. Those are two different value systems. You can't do both. So where is your energy going to go? I don't want to fight against something I hate. That's draining to me. I want to teach. I want to teach that there's a better way to do this. Does it have to change names? I don't really care. And this is from a person that everything that I benefit from right now has had origins or roots in trauma towards my people. The medical field, they were still doing hysterectomies on the illegal immigrants down in South Texas, without their consent. Those things are still happening. Does that mean that I'm not going to benefit from that same system and field? We have to be able to be in the space to have these uncomfortable conversations and fight the temptation to get up from the table and leave when it gets really hard.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to close with one last question. What advice would you give to BCBAs who want to ensure that they're not unintentionally doing harm with the services they're providing?
Build in qualitative measures if you're not already. If you have past clients, clients that have left, clients that have graduated, reach out to them, get testimonials. Also, learn what ableist language looks like and sounds like, and really begin to dissect everything that you use, your initial intake forms, the assessments that you choose to use, the way that you look at behaviors, target behaviors, looking at the language that we use to identify. I was looking at the FAST, and it talks about, does a child exhibit these annoying behaviors on purpose? I'm like, that's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're already making things so pathological in just the language that we use every single day. So of course that's going to influence how you perceive the person. Build in person-centered planning. That should be everything. Cultural, competency practices. If you're a supervisor, I mean, I'm like thinking in all areas. If you're supervising people, are you aware, it's Ramadan. I have supervisees that are observing Ramadan. Do you have that written in your supervision contract? The acknowledgement, awareness, and acceptance of religious and holy days. Like, we have to change every single thing that we maybe just didn't even think needed to be addressed because it didn't impact us. And I know that's a big kind of broad statement, but you have to start really looking at things from a critical lens and saying, would I want this done to me? Would I want someone talking about my child this way? If I went in for an interview, would I be okay with the interviewer knowing every single thing, every single deficit that I had? So, really start to look at how you set up your clinics, how you set up your practices. What are the values of your team, your clinic? And start from there.
All right, Mari, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your perspective. I think it's so important to, really put our clients' dignity and well-being at the forefront. So we have a lot of work to do as a field, and you are so valuable to it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm excited about the work. It's a lot, but we're starting, and that's a beautiful thing to see.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with one person who you think will find value in it too. By doing so, you'll be helping our mission to improve access to autism services around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.